My name is Valentina Ruiz, and I'm 30 years old. And if you ask anyone in my family who I am, they'll probably say, "Oh, she's the quiet one, the one who draws." That's all I ever was to them. Just the girl with the sketchbook in the corner. The one who wasted time while everyone else built real lives. The one who could have done more. They never saw it as talent. Never asked what I was creating. Never wondered why I was always so quiet. Just that I was. And when I tried to show them my work, they'd tilt their heads, nod awkwardly, and move on. No praise, no critique, just silence dressed as politeness. But before I continue, don't forget to like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who might be living in the same silence. Now, let me tell you what it's like to be invisible in your own family. I come from a long line of achievers: doctors, lawyers, engineers. My brother Mateo is a software developer in São Paulo. My sister Helena owns 3 salons and just opened a 4th. My father was head of cardiology at a top hospital before retiring early. My mother? The quiet enforcer. Never had a job, but her judgment worked overtime. Every Sunday we'd gather in my parents' large colonial home, big, echoing, sterile. The kind of place where emotions didn't belong, only results. Mateo would brag about his new bonus. Helena would share glossy photos from another retreat in Bali. Dad would quietly nod in approval, and Mom would refill the wine glasses, only for them. I'd sit at the end of the table, drawing in the margins of napkins. No one asked what I was up to. They never even noticed I brought a new sketchpad each week. Art to them wasn't serious. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't real. Once I remember slipping one of my finished portrait commissions into the living room. Framed, detailed, months of work. I placed it on a side table just to see if anyone would react. No one did. They moved it to dust the surface and never put it back. After that, I stopped trying. I finished my degree in fine arts quietly, without ceremony. Did freelance gigs, illustrated children's books, sold digital commissions online. I wasn't rich, but I was surviving. More importantly, I was doing it without them. Still, part of me always hoped, not for applause, but maybe a, "That's nice, Val." It never came. When the pandemic hit, my online commissions exploded. People stuck at home wanted portraits of their pets, of lost loved ones, of wedding memories postponed. My inbox flooded. I went full-time, then hired a friend to help with admin. I moved out of my tiny apartment into a modest cottage with a studio out back. None of them knew. I had stopped attending the Sunday lunches after Mom's comment one week. "So, are you still doodling, or have you found a real job yet?" I didn't answer. I just smiled. And the next week, I didn't show up. No one followed up. Not a text. Not a call. 2 years passed in quiet distance. I built a client base, opened an online shop. Then came a breakthrough. A celebrity found my work through a viral post. She tagged me in an Instagram story seen by millions. Overnight, I had 80,000 followers. In a month, I had 6 figures in the bank. I was featured in a national magazine under the title, "The Illustrator Who Captures Emotion Like a Photographer." Still, I heard nothing from my family, and I was okay with that. Until the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was preparing an order for a hospital that commissioned 100 illustrated journals for children in oncology wards. That's when I got the call. The number was unfamiliar. The voice was shaky. "Hi, this is Clara, a nurse at St. Gerard's. Are you Valentina Ruiz?" My stomach turned. "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry to reach you this way, but your mother, she listed you as her emergency contact." It was the first time I'd heard that word applied to me in years. Contact. Apparently, there'd been an accident. My parents had been traveling out of town when my father fainted behind the wheel. The crash wasn't fatal, but the damage was extensive. multiple surgeries, a long recovery ahead. Insurance wasn't covering everything. Savings had already been drained from previous procedures. They needed help. And for some reason, in that moment of desperation, I became real again. That night, I sat in my studio with my sketch pad open, not drawing, just staring. I thought about every Sunday lunch, every eye roll when I mentioned my work, every time they introduced me as the artsy one with that tone, the one that sounds like a compliment but isn't. And now, suddenly, I mattered, not because they saw me, but because they needed me. I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't bitter. I was something worse, numb. But what I did next? That's the part I'll never forget. It's strange how the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from worry, from memory. I kept hearing the nurse's voice on repeat. She listed you as her emergency contact. The woman who hadn't texted me in 2 years. The mother who once told her friends I was just going through a phase with my art. Now she was reaching through silence. But not to check on me, not to say she missed me, just to survive. I sat in my studio, wrapped in the soft hum of a desk lamp, surrounded by my framed commissions, pieces that had made strangers cry, images that had helped children grieve, portraits that had rebuilt memories for families across the world. And yet the only people who never saw value in my hands were the ones who raised me. I pulled out the old sketchbook I'd hidden away, the one I started in college, the one filled with drawings of my family, because I had learned not to confuse urgency with love. For 2 days, I went about my life, shipped orders, replied to clients, watered my lemon tree. But something tugged at me. Not guilt, curiosity. I needed to see it. Not them. The house. The place that raised me, muted me, and forgot me. I drove there on a Thursday, mid-morning. I parked 2 blocks away and walked the familiar sidewalk I hadn't touched in years. It was quieter than I remembered. The rose bushes were overgrown. One shutter hung loose. A small "for sale" sign leaned awkwardly against the front steps. I stood there longer than I should have, just breathing, not crying, not shaking, just observing. This was the kingdom I was never crowned in. And now, it was falling. A neighbor across the street opened their blinds, saw me, then closed them again. I didn't knock. I just turned and walked away. Back in the car, I sat in silence, hands on the steering wheel, until my phone buzzed. A message from Raphael. They asked if you were coming. I didn't know what to say. Neither did I. But I knew what I felt. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was space. A space between who I had been and who I was now. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the wind push shadows across the lawn. I thought about how many years I spent trying to earn something that should have been freely given. And then I picked up my sketchbook, turned to a blank page, and drew the house. But this time, I didn't sketch it like a home. I drew it like a memory fading into fog. And when I was done, I wrote beneath it, "Some stories end without closure, and that's still an ending." I closed the book, let the ink dry, and I slept. Not because everything was okay, but because I no longer needed it to be. There was a page of Matteo fixing his tie before prom, Helena curled on the couch, hair in rollers, my dad asleep in his armchair, glasses slipping, and one of my mom, watering her orchids, back turned. I flipped through slowly. Each page was a quiet plea. Notice me. See what I see. See me. But they never did. And now, when their world cracked, they remembered I existed. I don't know what I expected. Gratitude. Apology. A real conversation. What I got was an email. Not from them. From Raphael. A distant cousin. Someone I hadn't spoken to since my grandfather's funeral. Hi, Valentina. I hope this finds you well. Your parents are going through a difficult time. They've asked me to help reach out. There have been a lot of medical expenses and complications. I think they would really appreciate any help you might be able to offer. Let me know. Raphael. No mention of love. No. How are you? Just a request, wrapped in polite pressure. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care. The first time I ignored the call, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just silence. Like hanging up on a stranger you never agreed to meet in the first place. It wasn't until the fourth call in 3 days that something shifted. Not inside me, but around me. My phone, once a place of peace and creativity, had become a siren for someone else's panic. Someone who hadn't spoken to me in years. Someone who used to call my art a distraction. That afternoon, I muted my phone completely. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I had finally remembered. I remembered who I had become. And I remembered how long it had taken me to stop being the girl who said yes just to feel seen. I had grown roots in silence, built walls in solitude, and made peace with a world that had no place for me, except the one I carved out myself. But life has a twisted way of testing the boundaries you set. Later that evening, a knock came to my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, I rarely do. He looked past me, into the house, as if trying to find proof that I had changed, maybe hoping for some familiar trace of the sister he remembered ignoring. I know you've been busy, he added, like that explained the gap. I've been building a life, I said flatly. He nodded. Yeah, I see that. I mean, I saw your name in that article. So that's what brought him here. Not concern, not regret. Visibility. Success that couldn't be ignored anymore. I stepped out, closing the door gently behind me. What do you want, Mateo? He sighed. They're going to lose everything. The insurance is tapped out, the house, the debt, it's all crashing down. Dad doesn't want to say it, but we need help. We. That word again. As if I had been part of the we all along. They're your parents too, Val. They're people who treated my work like trash and my silence like convenience, I replied. The wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the kind of ordinary moment that somehow made everything feel heavier. They made mistakes, he said. No, I corrected. They made patterns. Mistakes come with apologies. Patterns come with expectations. Mateo's shoulders dropped. I'm not saying you owe them, he said, but maybe this is a chance to fix something. I looked him dead in the eye. You only fix things that want to be repaired. He had no answer. Eventually, he left. He didn't shout, didn't beg, just walked back to his car like a man returning from a battle he never trained for. That night, I couldn't focus on work. My mind kept looping, rewinding tiny phrases. They're your parents too. Maybe this is a chance. Chance for what? Redemption? Re-entry into a family that always saw me as the optional character? I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started drawing. Not them, not the house, not the moment at the door. I drew a lifeline, a continuous thread moving through a maze. It twisted, split, frayed, knotted, and finally emerged clean again. No words, just emotion. By the time I finished, I knew what I had to do. Not for them, for me. The next morning, I contacted an old client, Elena Duarte, a philanthropic investor I had once done a portrait of her late husband for. She ran a community recovery program, had ties to nonprofit hospitals, and had once said, if you ever need anything, you call me first. So I did. She listened to my story without judgment. At the end, she said something that made my chest tighten. You don't owe them anything, Valentina. But if you choose to help, then do it in a way that honors you, not them. I nodded through the phone, biting back whatever was trying to surface in my throat. Elena connected me with a legal representative and a confidential donation program tied to hospital relief. I donated a substantial amount anonymously, enough to cover all immediate expenses, enough to stabilize their chaos, without ever attaching my name. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want a thank you. I just wanted it to end. That night, Matteo called again. I don't know what you did, but things are covered now. The hospital confirmed it. Good, I said. He paused. Did you? I didn't do it for them, I replied. I did it because I didn't want to carry the weight of watching them fall. He was silent for a moment, then whispered, You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. And I knew. That was the closest I'd ever get to an apology. Through the small window beside the frame, I saw him, Matteo, my brother. I froze. We hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. The last time I saw him, he was passing around wedding invitations like they were golden tickets. I didn't receive one, but I did receive the group photo afterward. He looked thinner now, nervous, dressed in casual clothes that looked out of place on someone who always wore labels. I didn't open the door right away. I made him wait. Then, slowly, I turned the handle and stepped into the doorway. Not out, just enough so he couldn't pretend this was normal. He looked up, eyes tired, voice soft. Hey, can we talk? I crossed my arms. About what? His mouth opened like he had a speech prepared, but none of it came out. He just looked at me, like he was trying to recognize someone in a crowd. Finally, he said, It's about Mom and Dad. Of course it was. They're not doing well, he continued. Financially, emotionally, it's worse than we thought. I said nothing. There's something no one tells you about quiet victories. They feel heavier than expected. After I hung up on Matteo, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel proud. I felt hollow. Because no one claps for the person who helps in silence. No one writes songs about those who save others without being seen. I thought helping them, on my own terms, would untangle something in me. But instead, it revealed a knot I hadn't known was still there. For years, I thought I wanted them to say sorry. But what I really wanted was for them to see me. And now, they never would. Not truly. Because their lives had been saved by a ghost. An anonymous name on a ledger. A miracle with no face. The next week passed like fog. I finished a commission for a children's grief foundation, twin siblings who had lost their grandmother. Their parents wanted a painting that blended old family photos with the garden she loved. I spent hours on the flowers. I gave them a softness I never gave to my own memories. Meanwhile, the people it was about had barely noticed when I disappeared. A few days later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since college, Daniela, a former classmate from my first figure drawing course. We met by accident in the corner of a bookstore. She recognized me first. Valentina Ruiz? The artist with the Instagram mural series? I nodded. That's me. She smiled wide. I still have one of your early zines, the one with the girl on the rooftop. I laughed. Wow, I forgot those even existed. We talked for a while, and then she asked the question no one had dared to in years. Did your family ever come around? I hesitated. It would have been easy to lie, to say they supported me now, that everything was fine, but I didn't. No, I said. But I did. She blinked. You did what? I came around to myself. That night, I started painting again. Not commissions, not requests, just for me. It had been a long time since I created something that didn't have a deadline or a buyer. I painted a hallway. Dim light, faint outlines of forgotten portraits, and at the end, an open door. Nothing symbolic, nothing metaphorical, just a quiet suggestion. Not every story ends with being invited back in. Sometimes you build a better place somewhere else. A week later, Matteo texted me again. This time, he didn't mention our parents. Just a single question. Do you want to meet for coffee? I didn't know what to say. Part of me feared he was trying to broker another request. Another backdoor way of asking for help. Or worse, validation. But another part of me, the one that still remembered birthday parties and old video games and whispered jokes at boring dinners, was curious. So I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, one I liked because no one ever asked what you were working on. Mateo was already there when I arrived. No laptop, no distractions, just him. He stood when he saw me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not guilt, not grief, just age. He looked older than I remembered, like someone who'd stopped believing they were invincible. We talked about neutral things, traffic, work, the coffee, and then he said something I hadn't expected. You know they still don't know it was you. I sipped my drink. Good. He nodded. But I do. We sat in silence for a while before he added, they've been different since. Quieter, softer. I don't know if it's growth or just the fear of losing everything. Probably both, I said. Then he said it, softly but clearly. I was wrong, Val. I looked at him. About what? About you, about your art, about thinking it was small just because I didn't understand it. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't rehearsed. He was just honest. And that honesty, from someone who used to laugh behind my back, meant more than any apology from our parents ever could. That night, I walked home alone. The city buzzed around me, loud and indifferent, but inside, something quiet was healing. Not because I was finally being seen, but because I had stopped asking for it. When I delivered it, the children hugged me without hesitation. That moment hit harder than I expected. It reminded me that art had always been my language, and that love, when real, never needed translation. One night, I received an envelope in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside, a black and white photo. It was one of my early sketches. My parents' living room. Charcoal. Crooked lines. Soft shading. I had drawn it at 17, in the back of my algebra notebook. On the back of the photo, in unfamiliar handwriting, was one line. Someone kept this all these years. I didn't know what to make of it. Did my mother keep it? My father? Did they see more than they ever admitted? Or was this Raphael's way of saying he remembered something they never did? I stared at the drawing long into the night, tracing the edges with my fingers. It felt surreal to think that something I had once torn from a notebook in frustration had survived. There's something strange about forgiveness. People think it's a moment, a single gesture, a line you cross once and never revisit. But it's not. Forgiveness is a hallway you walk through alone, sometimes back and forth, deciding with each step whether to keep going or turn around. After meeting Mateo, I thought I'd feel closure. Instead, I felt distance, not the painful kind, the kind you earn, the kind that protects you. A few mornings later, I received a parcel in the mail, no return label, just my name, printed neatly. Inside was a small box wrapped in old newspaper. Tucked beneath it was a folded sheet of stationery paper. No greeting, no signature, just 7 words, handwritten in small, careful print. We never knew how much it mattered. I opened the box. It held a stack of old sketchbooks. Mine, ones I thought had been lost, ones I left behind when I moved out. I flipped through them slowly, feeling the pages between my fingers like they might dissolve. Mrs. Ellis, my high school art teacher. Her email was brief. Valentina, I saw your mural in the community exhibit. It brought tears to my eyes. I remember the way you used to disappear into your work and how loud your silence was back then. I hope you're well. I always believed in you. I stared at her message for a long time, A single teacher, one hallway, one dusty classroom. She had noticed what my own family didn't. I replied with a thank you, a genuine one. And then I added, sometimes it takes a stranger to show you that you were never invisible, just overlooked. The next morning, I received another call. This time, I answered. It was Mateo. Mom had a fall, he said. Nothing serious, but it shook her. I didn't ask what he wanted. I already knew. I'm not coming, I said gently. I know, he replied. There was no guilt in his voice this time, just understanding. But she's been asking about your art. That made me pause. Why? He sighed. She's been staring at that sketch of her hands for hours. She didn't know you kept it. Or maybe she forgot. But she keeps asking if you ever drew anything else of her. I closed my eyes. I had. Dozens of times. But always from behind. Always from a distance. Like trying to capture something that kept walking away. I didn't send her the drawings. Instead, I started a new one. Not from memory. From imagination. I drew her, not as she was, but as I once hoped she would be. Smiling, holding a book, barefoot in the garden, hair unpinned, face soft. Not perfect, just human. When it was finished, I didn't frame it. I didn't sign it. I folded it and mailed it to the hospital, addressed only to her room. No note, no explanation, just the picture, a quiet offering. Not for reconciliation, but for release. That evening, I called Elena Duarte again. She answered on the second ring. You okay, Val? Yes, I said. I think I'm ready to give back in a bigger way. She didn't ask for details. She just listened. And together, we began planning an art outreach program for young women in underserved communities, especially those silenced by family, tradition, or fear. It would be called The Quiet Gallery. Each girl would have her own sketchbook, her own space, her own way of saying I exist. It was the first project I'd ever done that didn't feel like I was proving something. It just felt right. A few days later, I received a short voicemail. It was from my mother. Her voice was soft, strained. I got the picture. I don't know what to say, but I wanted to say something. That was it. I didn't save the message, but I didn't delete it immediately either. I let it sit there, quietly, like a final word that didn't need an answer. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no noise, just peace. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need them to understand me, because I understood myself. And that was enough. The drawings were raw, early, imperfect. A girl learning how to express pain with a pencil. There were portraits of classmates, a few fantasy creatures, one or two sketches of Mateo and our dog. And then, near the back, a simple line drawing of my mother's hands, resting on a teacup. No face, no background, just the hands. I remembered drawing them, not because I was inspired, but because I wanted to remember a moment where she looked calm. That memory hit me harder than expected. For the first time in a long while, I let myself revisit that version of myself, the teenager who drew in margins, whose hands were always stained with graphite, who begged with every picture, "Please, see me." I sat on my porch with those books in my lap, sun warming my legs, wind moving lazily through the trees. It wasn't regret that filled me. It was mourning. Not for what was lost, but for what was never known. That night, I opened my inbox and saw a message from someone I hadn't heard from in over a decade.
The first meeting for the Quiet Gallery took place in a room with bad lighting and too many folding chairs. There were only 5 girls, all between 15 and 17. All with the same look I once carried, like someone had asked them to be quiet one too many times, and they obeyed so well they forgot what it felt like to speak. Elena introduced me without ceremony, just a nod and a sentence. This is Valentina Ruiz. She's the reason we're here. I didn't correct her, because in a way, It was true. I was the blueprint for what silence could do, and what art could rebuild. I didn't teach them how to draw. That wasn't the point. I gave them space, materials, and a mirror. Each girl received a blank sketchbook on the first day. No name on the front, no pressure, just paper, and the permission to fill it on their own terms. Some drew flowers, others faces without features. One girl, Lucia, only used black ink. Nothing else. Sharp lines, heavy contrast. Every drawing felt like a scream, but I never asked her to explain. I just sat with them, not above, not in front, beside. After the session ended, I stayed behind to clean up. Lucia hovered near the doorway. She didn't say goodbye like the others, just held her sketchbook tightly, then asked, "Do you think it's okay to be angry?" I met her eyes. "I think it's human." She nodded slowly. "Because mine always said anger made you ugly." I took a breath. Some people fear anger because it's the first sound silence makes when it cracks. But I think it can be beautiful if you let it speak instead of burn. She didn't answer, but she smiled just a little. Then she left. That night, I sat in my garden and reread some of my old journal entries. So many were filled with doubts, questions, frustrations written in the margins of pages I never thought anyone would see. But something caught my eye. A line, scrawled in tiny handwriting at the bottom of one page. "If I ever feel seen, I hope it doesn't hurt." I don't remember writing it, but I remember the feeling. The fear that being noticed would come with judgment. That visibility would feel like exposure, not recognition. And now, here I was, visible, present, still whole. The next few weeks passed quietly. The gallery program grew. The girls began arriving earlier, staying longer. One of them, Raina, started helping me clean up after each session. We didn't talk much, but she always made sure to leave a doodle somewhere for me to find later, on the whiteboard, inside my bag, even on the back of my hand once. They were all versions of the same character. A girl with stars for eyes and plants growing from her hair. Hope, in a hoodie. One day, I received a message from the hospital. My father had been discharged. My mother was recovering steadily. No requests, no invitations, just an update. I didn't know how they got my number, but I didn't block them either. I simply noted the date and moved on. I began planning the first quiet gallery exhibit. It would be intimate, no press, just the girls, their families, if they chose to invite them, and a few community mentors. Each girl would pick one piece to showcase. They didn't have to explain it. They didn't have to smile. They just had to be there. That was enough. The week before the event, I stayed late prepping the space. I adjusted lighting, mounted frames, reviewed the name cards. While doing so, I found Lucia standing quietly in the doorway again. "You're not going to put one up?" she asked, pointing to the empty spot near the entrance. I looked at the wall, hadn't even thought about it. "No," I said. "This is their night." She tilted her head. "But you made the room." I smiled. Sometimes it's okay to build something without taking credit. She walked up beside me, holding out one of her own pieces. "Then let me put mine there," she said. And I did. It was her boldest one yet, a silhouette of a girl with her mouth stitched shut, ripping the thread out with a paintbrush. Underneath, one word: enough. The night of the gallery was soft and powerful. No speeches, just presence. Families wandered slowly, reading, nodding, holding back tears. One woman stood in front of Raina's drawing for 15 minutes. Another father quietly reached for his daughter's hand and whispered, "I didn't know." It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, but it was real. And that made it louder than anything else I'd ever created. Later that evening, as we were taking down the last of the display, I received a text. From Mateo. Just a photo. It was the drawing I had mailed to the hospital weeks ago. My mother, smiling in an imagined garden. She had framed it. Beneath the photo, a short message. She keeps it by her bed. Every night. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That moment wasn't about them anymore. It was about what I had become, what I had made. A life, a legacy.
And a room where quiet girls could finally speak. A week after the gallery, the silence felt louder than usual. Not uncomfortable, just different. Like the house was catching its breath after holding so much unspoken weight. I walked from room to room with my tea, tracing light through windows, pausing to watch shadows stretch across the wooden floors. There was no applause, no standing ovation, just the hum of the fridge and the warmth of a sunrise I hadn't noticed in days. And somehow, that was enough. Because this time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like completion. Later that morning, I opened my email to find a message from a name I didn't recognize. Dr. Andrea Mears. She introduced herself as a cultural studies professor who had attended the exhibit quietly as a guest of one of the board members. She had been particularly moved by Lucia's piece, and apparently by me. Her email was long, thoughtful. She wrote about the healing potential of community art and asked if I'd ever consider giving a guest talk at her university. Not just about your personal story, she added, but about how you translated pain into space. That's a curriculum more students need than they realize. I didn't reply right away. I let it sit, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to answer from a place of clarity, not instinct. That afternoon, I took a walk through the old neighborhood, past the corner store with the best mangoes, past the cracked sidewalk where I once scraped my knee so badly I limped for a week. Everything looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally. I passed our old house. The porch had been repainted, the yard cleaner, but the window, the one I used to sit behind and draw, was still there. I paused for a moment, long enough to feel the air shift. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. That evening, I finally responded to Dr. Mears. Yes, but only if I can bring the girls with me, she replied within the hour. Even better. And just like that, a new door opened. The girls were nervous. None of them had ever spoken in front of a crowd before, let alone a university lecture hall. Raina asked if she had to say anything at all. No, I told her. Just being there is enough. The lecture was scheduled for mid-March. We had 3 weeks. I let them design their own parts, however they wanted to share. Lucia wanted to read a poem. Isabel planned to show progress photos of her sketchbook from week 1 to now. Even the quietest one, Mara, whispered to me, "Maybe I'll just sit next to you, but I want to come." That was enough. That was more than enough. On the day of the event, I wore a simple black outfit. No colors, no distractions. I wanted the girls to shine. They did. Lucia's voice cracked halfway through her poem, but she kept going. And when she finished, the room was silent in the best way, the kind of silence that comes after something honest. Raina didn't speak, but her drawings spoke for her. And when it was my turn, I stood without notes, just my hands and my breath. I used to think recognition came from others, I said. That being seen meant being validated. But now I know. It starts here. I pointed gently to my chest. From building a life that doesn't need to be proven. There were tears in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet nods, hands over mouths, eyes that finally looked inward. After the talk, a girl approached me. Not one of mine, someone from the audience. She couldn't have been older than 19. She handed me a folded napkin. On it, a sketch. Me, standing in front of the girls with the words, "You gave us language," written underneath. I held it like glass. "Keep going," she whispered. We're listening now. Later that night, back home, I found myself standing in my studio. Not working, just standing. So much had changed. Not outside, inside. I no longer painted to prove I belonged. I painted to reflect the belonging I had created. A few days later, Matteo called again. I answered, more out of rhythm than intent. He sounded tired. "They're moving," he said, "to a smaller place. I'm helping them pack." I didn't ask where. I didn't ask why. But he continued. "I found one of your paintings in Mom's closet. It was wrapped in a blanket. Looks like it's been there for years." That caught my breath. "I didn't even know she had it," he added. "She never said." I paused. "Which one was it?" "The one of the girl alone at the table," he said, "with the empty chairs." I had drawn that in college, after my first solo Thanksgiving. I never meant to keep it. I never meant to share it. And yet, somehow, she had it. Matteo hesitated. "Do you want it back?" I thought for a moment. "No," I said softly. "Let her keep it." Not because it changed anything, but because it said everything. That night, I hung a new piece in my studio, a painting of a staircase, old, cracked, uneven, but at the top, light. A door, a silhouette waiting, hand extended, not to pull someone up, but to walk alongside them. And below, in the corner, one word, becoming. Because that's what this had been all along. Not a return, not a revenge, but a becoming, a process, a choice, a voice. 3 weeks passed after the university talk, but the aftershocks continued to ripple in subtle ways. Elena sent me photos of a new group starting at another community center, this time in the next city over. She had used the quiet gallery structure, same sketchbooks, same open space, different girls, same silence finally being unraveled. One image caught my eye. A girl, barely 14, had drawn a window with iron bars. Inside it, a flower stretching toward the sun. Underneath, not broken, just buried. It undid me, not because it was tragic, but because it was true. So much of survival lives in metaphor, and so much of art becomes autobiography. Later that afternoon, I took a walk to the library, the one I used to hide in during high school lunch breaks. The librarian recognized me. I didn't recognize her. "You did the gallery, right?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "Yes." "My granddaughter showed me the article," she said. "You're doing good things. She said you might walk by, told me to give this to you if I saw you." I took it in silence. Inside, a small velvet box and a folded note. The box held a silver chain with a single charm, an easel, carved delicately from wood. Too new to be old, too personal to be random. The note was 2 lines. "I never understood your art, but I kept trying. I'm sorry." No signature, just the soft imprint of someone trying to leave a thread where a bridge had already burned. I held the charm between my fingers, not knowing what to feel. Was it a gesture, a confession, a peace offering? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe some apologies weren't meant to be accepted, just acknowledged. That evening, I wore the charm. Not because I forgave, but because I was done carrying what wasn't mine. The past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer directed me. I was allowed to remember without reopening the wound. The next week, Lucia asked if she could stay after class. She had finished a new piece, larger than usual. When she showed me, I felt my breath catch. It was a split portrait. On one side, a woman made of wire, bound tightly with locks on her wrists. On the other, the same woman, but flowing, drawn with watercolors, open palms, soft lines like wind. The caption read, "She made herself again, without permission." Lucia looked at me. "I want this to be my last piece. For now. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not always surviving." I hugged her, gently, briefly. "You're more than what hurt you," I whispered. She smiled. "So are you." I spent that night painting for myself, not for a gallery, not for the girls, not even for closure, just for the sheer joy of it. A watercolor piece, abstract, warm tones, swirls that looked like wind and memory blended together. I didn't name it, didn't frame it. I just hung it in the hallway where morning light would hit it first. The next morning, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, long, no return address. I recognized the penmanship, my mother's. The first few lines were awkward, careful. Then the tone shifted, softer, still flawed, but human. She spoke of things I'd forgotten, how I used to draw on napkins at the kitchen table, how she once found a doodle of hers inside a library book I returned, how she didn't understand art because she was afraid of anything that revealed too much. "You always made me nervous," she wrote, "not because of who you were, but because I knew I couldn't reach you, and I blamed you for it. That wasn't fair." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for contact. She simply ended with, "If nothing else, I'm glad the world sees you now. I hope you keep showing it who you are." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to revisit often, but to remind myself that even small echoes are still sound. That night, as I stood watering the plants outside, my neighbor peeked over the fence. "I saw the article in the paper," she said. "You've done a lot." I smiled, a little at a time. She nodded, then added, "You always seemed so quiet." Guess that quiet was just full. And I thought about that. How long I had been quiet. How full it had become. Not heavy, not loud. Just whole. I thanked her and walked to the nonfiction section, running my hand across the spines without reading. It wasn't research I needed, it was grounding. Sometimes you go back to the places that once felt safe, not to revisit the past, but to measure your distance from it. That night, I received an email from Matteo. Short. Unusual for him. "They're moving next week. She wants to leave something for you before she goes. No pressure." I stared at the screen, the words swimming slightly. She. Not mom. Not our mother. She. It didn't make it easier, but it made it real. I didn't go the next day, or the one after. But 3 mornings later, I found myself walking past their new address, a modest apartment complex a few blocks from the hospital. Not intentionally, just drifting. I didn't go inside, but as I turned to leave, the front desk clerk stepped out. "Are you Valentina?" she asked, holding a small padded envelope. Caught off guard, I nodded. The gallery board asked if I wanted to give my name to the program. They said it would help with visibility, funding, legitimacy. But I hesitated, because for years my name had been ignored, mispronounced, dismissed. It wasn't just a signature, it was a wound. To see it on a wall meant inviting the world to speak it, and I wasn't sure I wanted that. Still, I said yes, not for recognition, but because I wanted the girls to know that claiming space is not arrogance. It's memory. It's proof that you were here, that you made something, that your voice left a mark. A week later, the new plaque was installed outside the studio. The Valentina Ruiz Creative Center, a safe space for quiet girls. I stood in front of it alone for a while, not crying, just breathing. Because for the first time in my life, I realized something. I hadn't just healed. I had built something from the healing, a new kind of inheritance. Lucia came by that afternoon. She wasn't alone, added the other side, not perfect but solid. A continuation, not closure, not a miracle, just proof. That becoming is not about leaving the past. It's about not letting it stop you. Days later, I got a message from Elena, A new group of girls was starting in a shelter for domestic abuse survivors. She asked if I wanted to visit. I didn't hesitate. They were young, some barely 12. But their eyes held storms they didn't have words for. I didn't ask them to share. I just handed each one a brush and told them the only rule: no erasing. They looked confused, but then they began. Tentative, messy, beautiful. One girl painted her name over and over. Another just swirled colors into shapes that looked like rain and fire at the same time. When they finished, they didn't say much, but their shoulders had lowered. Their breathing changed, and that was enough. On the way home, I passed by a small bookstore. In the window, a display for a new collection titled When Quiet Speaks. The author was listed as anonymous, but I recognized the style immediately. It was one of Raina's poems. She had self-published. I walked inside and bought 5 copies, because when quiet girls roar, you don't just clap, you help them echo. Mateo called again. This time I answered quickly. He told me they had settled into their new apartment, that our father was attending counseling, that our mother had started knitting. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how, because this wasn't about returning to what was. It was about respecting what is. Then he said something I didn't expect. They saw the article about the center. I said nothing. He added, they didn't know what to say. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I think, he continued, they finally realized you were never waiting. I paused. I wasn't, I said gently. He let that sit, then added, but I think they are. That night I wrote a letter, not to send, just to write. I told them about the girls, about the studio, about the poem and the painting and the bridge. I didn't accuse. I didn't forgive. I just told the truth. And when I finished, I folded the paper and placed it in a book on my shelf. Because sometimes the story doesn't need an audience. It just needs to be told, even if only to yourself. I stood outside again, watering the garden. The jasmine had spread. The succulents I once thought were dying had grown taller than the fence. A neighbor walked by and waved. I waved back. Then I whispered to the plants, not to be poetic, but because they had always been there. I'm still here. Not broken. Not waiting. Just present. And for the first time in a long time. Full. Her mother stood beside her, nervous, holding a small wrapped box. I wanted you to have this, she said, avoiding eye contact. It's something Lucia made, but it was my idea. I unwrapped the box slowly. Inside, a clay sculpture, 2 figures, one seated with her head down, one standing beside her, holding a lamp. On the base, the words, "She lit the room I thought was mine alone." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Lucia just smiled and whispered, "Now I'm the one building rooms." That night, I looked through some of my older pieces. Most I had forgotten about, tucked away in folders, closets, places that no longer held shadows. One caught my eye, a painting of a bridge, half finished. The foundation was strong, but the other side was just sky. It had no destination. I remember why I stopped. Back then, I didn't believe in the other side. I thought building anything would always lead to nothing. Now I knew better. Now I had crossed my own bridge, I finished it. There's something oddly intimate about a letter with no return address. It asks nothing. It promises nothing. It simply arrives. Like a thought you didn't ask for, but still needed to think. That's how it felt when the envelope came. My name scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. No stamp of urgency, no weight of demand. Just paper and ink, both softer than I remembered. I almost didn't open it. Some doors, even when they creak open slowly, still carry the risk of drafts. But I did. Inside, Only a few lines. I know we never listened. I hope it's not too late to hear. Your work, it saved someone we love, even if it wasn't us. It wasn't signed, but I knew who it was from, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I walked to the studio after that. Didn't drive, didn't rush. The streets felt different that morning, not because they changed, but because I had. But when they did, we kept them there, etched onto handmade paper, pinned like truth catching sunlight. That day, I wrote something for the wall, not for them, for me. When they finally looked for me, I wasn't waiting. I was building. And for the first time, I didn't tremble as I pinned my own voice to a wall that might outlive me. Later, I sat at my desk and reread Raina's newest poem draft. She had emailed it with the subject line, "Maybe this one's for you." It read, "You only notice the silence after the music stops." But I was humming the whole time. I printed it, framed it, placed it near the entrance, so everyone who walked in would see it before anything else. That night, the new girls arrived, nervous, quiet, their eyes darting the way mine once did, scanning for threat, approval, escape. We didn't ask them to share. We asked them to breathe. We handed them brushes, told them the only rule: no one tells you what your story is. One girl, maybe 13, raised her hand. Not even ourselves? I smiled. Especially not the version of ourselves someone else gave us. Her lips curved upward, barely, but it was enough. She dipped her brush and began to paint. The phone rang again the next morning, same number. I didn't answer, not out of bitterness, not even to make a point. I just didn't need to. They had finally realized I wasn't an emergency contact. I wasn't a fallback plan. I wasn't a second chance waiting to be written into their narrative. I was my own sentence, complete, final, punctuated by peace, not permission. I visited Lucia one last time before her flight. She was nervous, backpack too full, heart too open. She hugged me like she didn't want to let go. "Promise me you'll keep showing up," she whispered. I laughed. I already promised myself that. She stepped back, teary-eyed. "You changed my life," she said. I shook my head. You just finally heard your own voice." She didn't argue, just nodded. Some truths don't need to be repeated. They live in the silence between words. That evening, as I walked through the gallery alone, I noticed a new card pinned to the echo wall. I hadn't seen anyone add it, but there it was. She made space where none existed so I could stop shrinking. No name, no initials, but I knew. I recognized the handwriting. It was one of the first girls I ever taught, before the gallery had a name, before I had belief in myself. She had come back, quietly, without fanfare, and left behind the kind of thank you that doesn't require eye contact. I stood in front of the wall for a while, reading, breathing, remembering, but not as someone haunted, as someone rooted. When I left the studio that night, I didn't lock the door right away. I turned back and took one last look. The floor still bore scuff marks from restless feet. The walls held more truth than any textbook. And the silence. It wasn't empty. It was sacred. As I stepped outside, the wind caught my hair, carrying the scent of paint, jasmine, and dust. A familiar voice echoed in my mind, one I hadn't heard in years. "What will you do when they finally notice you?" And I answered, out loud this time, "Keep going." Because the recognition was never the destination. The work was. The same houses, the same trees, the same cracks in the pavement I once counted while pretending not to cry on the way home from school. But this time, I walked with a different posture. Not pride, not vengeance, just presence. I was no longer the girl who needed to be seen. I had seen myself. When I arrived, Elena was already inside. She had lit incense, soft lavender curling through the air, and was laying out sketchbooks for a new group starting that evening. She looked up and smiled. "You're early." I held up the envelope. "I think something's shifting." She didn't ask questions, just nodded. "Then it's time we start a new wall." There was a space in the gallery we'd left intentionally blank, not for aesthetic reasons, but for stories that didn't yet have names. We called it the Echo Wall. It held no frames, only words, quotes, confessions, fragments left behind by the girls who had passed through. We never forced them to leave anything. I didn't tell anyone I was going. Not because it was a secret, but because some choices only need to be understood by the one making them. I boarded the early train with nothing but a book, a scarf, and the quiet kind of resolve that doesn't ask for applause. The sky was still gray, the city not yet awake, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't heading toward a confrontation. I was walking into a memory, on purpose. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalk where I once tripped carrying too many books. Same fence with paint peeling like old conversations. Same mailbox I used to wait beside, hoping a scholarship, a letter, or a miracle would arrive. It never did. But today, I brought something with me instead. Not a gift, not revenge, just presence. I stood across the street from the house I once called home. The curtains were open. I saw movement. Figures I recognized even now. Slower, smaller, more tired than the ones I remembered. "I think it's all of us," I replied. She didn't cry. She just placed her hand over her heart. Sometimes that's louder than tears. Later that night, as I locked the studio, I found something tucked under the front door. A photo. Faded. Old. Of a little girl sitting at a table, drawing with broken crayons. My name scribbled in the corner. On the back, a note. "This is how I remember you." No signature. But I knew. I smiled. And for the first time, I placed a piece of my past on the echo wall. Let it live alongside all the others. Because I was no longer hiding, not from them, not from me. The garden bloomed again that spring. Not wild, but strong. Not perfect, but alive. I walked among the petals with bare feet and a quiet mind. And I thought about all the versions of myself that got me here. The girl who whispered into pillows. The teenager who sent portfolios into voids. The woman who built something from ashes and silence. They all lived here now, not as regrets, but as roots. Mateo visited a week later. He didn't come empty-handed. In his palm, a box. Inside, an old key. "I think it's yours," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "They sold the house," he added. "I found this in a drawer." I held it in my hand. It felt small. I didn't ask why he brought it. He didn't explain, but he smiled. "You don't need it anymore, but I thought you might want to decide what to do with it." That night, I placed the key in the garden, buried beneath the jasmine. Let it rest there, because some things are better rooted than carried. On the studio's anniversary wall, we added a new plaque. "You are not what they forgot. You are what you remembered for yourself." It was a quiet celebration, but every girl who touched a brush, a pen, or even just the light of the window, she became part of that sentence. And so did I. I still get letters, still answer some, but most I simply read, fold gently, and place in a box labeled echoes. Because not every voice needs to be amplified, some just need to be received. So here's where the story ends. Not with a crowd, not with a reunion, but with a woman in her studio, holding space for those who thought they didn't belong, teaching them that belonging isn't something given, it's something you plant, like seeds, like truth, like a name on a wall that once didn't exist, until you made it real. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this find the hearts that need them. Have a beautiful day, and may you always be seen for everything you are. Thank you. My mother walked through the hallway. My father stood near the kitchen sink. Neither of them looked out the window, and that was fine, because I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to see them not as giants or ghosts, but simply as people, and to release the hold they once had over my narrative. I stayed for 2 minutes, then turned around and walked away. No knock, no wave, no performance, just goodbye, without words, without wounds reopening. Back at the studio that afternoon, we held an open gallery. It was the anniversary of the center's founding. We didn't advertise. We simply opened the doors and let whoever needed something walk through. A woman came in, late 40s maybe, eyes heavy but curious. She didn't say much, just stood in front of one canvas and stared. Eventually, I joined her. She pointed at the words painted faintly along the side. "I survived by becoming the person I needed when I was young." She whispered, "That's me." I nodded. I